Hello, everyone. Welcome. My name is Chad Erickson, and I'm the Vice President of Strategy at MyAdvice. And it's my pleasure to welcome you today to our podcast and to introduce you to our guest. We are excited to have David Valaer with us. David is a great partner of MyAdvice, and he and I became acquainted through some of the same groups we work with. It's a small circle when you get into medical practices. And David and I were able to connect on email, and then we realized, hey, we're going to be at the same conference. We had an opportunity to sit down for a couple of hours and really get to know each other. And then we took it a step further. David was out here skiing in Park City, and David, you and I've talked about this ad nauseum. It was one of the most, probably a top 5 ski day that you and I both would say was a top 5 ever. On an amazing powder day, and but those are the types of opportunities we've had to really get to know each other, and so I'm excited to have you here. For our audience today, I'll give you a little bit and then let David talk a little more about his background. But David, you can see some of his pictures in the background. He was an F-16 pilot in the military for years. He's an accomplished pilot and still continues to fly acrobatics. He's trained. He's been all over the globe with his skill set. But that skill set and that discipline has really helped him in the business world as well. He's an MBA graduate at the University of Oregon and University of Texas for his MBA. So phenomenal background. He's been a successful business owner. He's been the president of several dermatology practices where he's gone in and helped them to grow and be prepped for sale and help them through that entire process. Anyway, phenomenal talent here with us today. David, maybe talk a little more about your background, some of your passion for business, and the things that you like doing, and take it away for a minute.
Okay. Well, I appreciate that, Chad. Yeah, we've had some great times together. Epic ski day with the powder at Park City. So really appreciate our partnership together. And yeah, I've had a passion for business really since I've been about 13 or 14. In fact, I had a used car lot when I was 14 years old and bought and sold cars. I've always looked for things in business that needed work to make it better. And I think what attracted me to the medical space, I ran approximately 50 dental clinics across America and then got into dermatology here several years ago. But I find that medical practitioners have a passion for their craft, whether it be dentistry or dermatology or whatever, their plastics, whatever they're focused on. But sometimes the passion for business is sometimes more of a sideline, and they have to do business, but they get to do their practice. And I think for me, bringing someone that has a passion for business to optimize the business itself, I think it's fun to work with medical practitioners and owners to do that. And I've been doing that for years now, so really enjoy that process.
So a couple of things you said there. First of all, you owned a car dealership and before you could even drive, which is amazing. It says a lot about you, which I love, that entrepreneur spirit. But you're absolutely right. I've been in this space now this is my 24th year of working with medical, practitioners. Phenomenal, so fun to be around. But the business side is an area where I love to help them. Right? They know what they know, and they're very good at it. And in our world, and understand the business side, love being able to help them be successful. We, of course, approach from the marketing side, you from the operations standpoint, which is so needed in today's world, and so it's awesome. And you've got great experience both in the dental and medical world, which is amazing. David, you and I've had a chance to talk about this quite a bit, and I think it's so fun. But as you think about where medicine is today, these practice owners, they have so many different strains on them. They also have a lot of opportunities. So some things on both sides that are kind of new. Maybe talk to our audience a little bit for a few minutes about some of the challenges that you continue to see in today's space as a medical provider, and also what are some of the opportunities that exist today that maybe didn't exist 5 to 10 years ago?
Well, I think it's similar to flying the F-16. We had a thing called situational awareness, and situational awareness is taking a lot of complex data, processing it, and making good decisions very quickly. Obviously, at 500 miles an hour, you're processing data quite quickly. But even doctors have to be doing that too in their practice. And I think the challenges today is the business environment is requiring more of a doctor's time. It just is. You've got more hassles with insurance and billing and employees and turnover and legal aspects and All those things have to be managed, and it takes more time. So I think arguably starting and running and building a practice today, although there are more opportunities, it probably requires more of the doctor's time on the business side than ever before in my experience and what I've seen for sure. I think the good news is the opportunity to build something of incredible value and scale it. Many doctors don't want to have several or dozens of doctors under them. They may not want multiple locations, but if they do, done correctly, they do have an opportunity to increase their net worth significantly more than they probably did 10, 20, 30 years ago, where they can develop a very clear strategy for exit with a very significant multiple, and really set themselves up for retirement in a wonderful way, even after they're done being a full-time doctor.
It's so true, and you bring up a lot of good points. These stresses you talk about, sort of these time constraints. How do if you're a provider today, how do you not allow and set proper boundaries in your office, or even how do you determine, gosh, when's the right time to bring in a CFO or a president, or even if it's a fractional CFO, right? Somebody that's just going to remove a burden to free up time so they can do what they do best. How do you help a practice owner decide when is that time?
Well, there's a fork in the road for practice owners. I would say 10 to maybe 20% of the practice owners develop a sincere passion for business, and they're willing and able and desire to lead that role. I've got one practitioner that has 30 locations now, and he only is chairside practicing half a day a week to keep his hand in the game. But he had to make a decision. I'm either going to be really good at my practice as a physician, or I'm going to lead the practice. But you kind of got to address that, because I think many owners try to do both. And as a result, they're stressed out, they're afraid, they're fried. They're trying to be hands-on for everything they do in the practice and be a great doctor or provider. And that is really tough nowadays. You can do it, but the burnout rate in doctors is higher than ever before. So I think step number one is, what is my passion? What do I want this to be? And working with someone like myself or someone who's really experienced in growing practices, let's figure out where you want to go. That's question number one. Do you want to have multiple locations? Do you want to have multiple providers? Do you want to have just your candy store that you have one or two practitioners and you take care of patients and that's what you do? Focusing on what you really want is incredibly important. And then you can develop a roadmap of what it's going to take to get there. And most of the practices I work with have got several providers and multiple staff, including a med spa often. And what I find is, if they're willing to reduce their patient-facing hours, maybe just a half a day or 1 day per week, and focus on the business versus focusing in the business, it really helps them grow the practice and reduce their stress load. Sure, they'll always say, well, my billings went down. Yes, but if you multiply that time effectively, you can actually increase your net worth long-term for the half a day or day that you don't spend patient-facing hours. So that's kind of the fork in the road, and the decision-making process early on is very important to do.
Dave, what I'm hearing you say, I think is very much coming directly from your F16 world, which is you need to have a vision and a mission plan before you go. Like, what are we trying to accomplish, and what are your goals? Because not everybody wants to run 30 practices, but by the same token, you don't need to. But if you don't run your business and know your business, it's going to run you. I was talking, several years ago to a very good friend of mine. Facial plastic, seemed very successful, and his practice administrator came to one day and said, "Hey, I'm not sure we're going to make payroll. We're probably going to go bankrupt." And he's like, "What do you mean?" And he's just so busy seeing patients, but hadn't been paying attention to the business, and expenses had gotten out of control, and wasn't really doing the things that were bringing the right margins. They were behind on their AR. And again, he just kind of thought these were all being taken care of. And so this opportunity cost, right? Yeah, maybe I give up a half day of practice at chair side, but
Yep.
now I'm actually focused on the business. And well, yeah, my billbles went down a little bit, but actually what I did is I grew my business because I know my business. So that's probably step one. And over time, yeah, if they're looking to grow it and do something awesome, they can. So yeah, it makes sense. You've gone into a lot of these. Go ahead. You were going to say something. I didn't mean to cut you off. Go ahead.
No, I think you brought up another key point. It really is. There's a book that was out years ago called The E Myth, the entrepreneurial
Yeah.
myth.
Yes.
You've heard of it. Wonderful
Great
book.
book.
I recommend all the listeners to read that book because it pertains to doctors equally as any other entrepreneur. The doctor is an entrepreneur who owns their own practice.
100%.
This idea of focusing on the business versus in the business. So your example was perfect. It's like, oh my gosh, something broke. No, it's kind of like an X-ray. The bone was broke from something else. The X-ray tells you it's broken, but what caused that? And usually, I
Yes.
find that major business failures is kind of like nuclear radiation. The damage happened months or years before, and now
Right.
the train finally caught up, and the facts are in front of you. But if you were focusing on the business, you can mitigate so many of those things, and having a trusted ally to do that with, to be your situational awareness. If you don't want to spend the time doing that, it's just vital, and they can't just be a lower level staff person. They've got to have that capability to really understand the practice and have that experience to do that for them.
Totally. And it thinks me, I'm kind of going back to some of these other concepts, but it's imperative that as a practice owner and part of focusing on the business is that you're having these good conversations with your staff, doing what in your terms, a debrief, right? In the flight world. But one of the things, if someone's listening today, they're like, well, how do I get to the root cause? Because the root cause is important. You could look at it initially and say, well, it's just this person. No, and it's not just the broken bone. What happened to cause that? And so a simple way to do that is there's the 5 whys. If you've never heard of that, you can go look that up or implement that. But ask 5 whys, and by the 5th why, it might get in the 4th, but by the 5th why this? Why did we do? Well, why did we do that? Now why? But why this? And as you continue to drill down, you should get to the root cause of that within those 5 steps. And it's important that you understand those aspects of your business.
And I've used put in the dermatology terms. I think a full body skin exam, obviously once a year for your patients, is required. The same is true for your practice, but it's not once a year. You
Yeah.
really should be monitoring KPIs and how the practice is doing, ideally once a month,
Yep.
no less than once a quarter, with someone who can really poke holes with, okay, well, we talked about doing this. Have you made any progress? Well, we really haven't. And having either a board of advisors or a practice leader consultant that walks alongside you to ask those hard questions, I think will really help pay dividends. What I find is it's kind of like flying an airplane. Things tend to creep. If you don't focus on it, it's all of a sudden the airspeed's off or the altitude's off. Well, practice is the same way. Expenses always creep. And unfortunately, they always creep the wrong direction. They never go down.
Right.
They don't creep
Weird.
right. Oh, I'm making more money than I expected. No, it doesn't work that way.
Right.
And every practice I go into, typically they're almost without exception. All practices should be making at least 10% EBITDA, earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation, amortization. At least 10% EBITDA to revenue. So if you're a $10 million practice, you should be having $1 million of EBITDA. If you're a $20 million practice, you have at least $2 million EBITDA. I will tell you, I go into many practices that are under 5%. And if you really dial one in, you can get them to 15%, maybe even 20%. That's a rare case, but you can do it if you really dial them in with a cash pay and a really good billing process. But that's an example of, that's the highest level KPI, is what's my EBITDA to revenue ratio. That's fundamental, and that should be measured every single month. But to go a step deeper on that, is every single provider is a profit center. So we, with all of our practices, will actually measure each doctor, and then we'll compare them. And some practices aren't comfortable doing this, but I think it's very productive. If you have multiple providers, every month you have a providers meeting and you put up Dr. A, B, C, D, E, and you compare them, billable hours, billable amount per hour, EBITDA, profitability, because you look at their overhead with their MAs and their staff to see what their net profit is, because ultimately every single one of your providers adds up to your overall EBITDA. And sooner or later, of course, the doctors figure out who A, B, C, and D is, but it's actually really positive because you put it's like, oh my gosh, how do you do that? How do you bill out? I mean, I've got some MA or excuse me PAs that are billing over $2 million a year, and they're doing it. Their take home is incredible, and the other one's like, wow, how can I do that? Well, they run a very tight, effective clinic, so it's almost like you start from the top, but then you got to start from the bottom and look at the actual providers themselves and see how each one of them is performing. And it gets short term, it can be stressful. Openly, there's going to be some times they're not sure they want to be monitored that closely. And it's not about grinding on them. It's about coaching them up and saying, here's the opportunity. Well, I want to make more money. Okay. Here's how we can do that. And I think that's when it gets exciting for not only the practice owner, but the providers themselves as well.
Those are great points. And I'm so glad you brought up some of those, because we, as our own business, right, we are constantly monitoring these as well. And so it baffles me when I hear of others that don't. We use a system called OKRs, which you're probably familiar with, but it's objectives and key results. We set annual objectives, we have quarterly objectives, and we have monthly objectives. And baked into that are your key results of how you're going to measure it. And we refer to it as intellectual honesty. What that means in that term, if you're only hearing about it for the first time, is it's not anecdotal, right? It's all about the numbers. The numbers tell the story. And so it's provider A, you did this, provider B, you did this. And if you're the only doctor in a practice, you can actually still do the same thing for members of your staff and measure their profitability to you and what's being asked. And so you don't have to limit that and think about it just in terms of doctors or PAs or nurse practitioners, right? It can be every single member of the staff should be a profit center and what they're contributing.
So let me share what you should not be doing, and this should be actually front and center for everyone. What you shouldn't be doing as a practice owner is once a year sitting down with your CPA and saying, "Oh, how'd we do this year?" That's the way you shouldn't do it. And unfortunately, in fact, many practice owners are going to be rolling their eyes saying, yeah, that's kind of what I do. That's the worst thing to do, because by the time the annual numbers are out, it's too late.
It is.
And your CPA and your lawyer, they have a role, but they're similar to a Mohs surgeon. A Mohs surgeon has certain things they do, but don't ask your Mohs surgeon to be doing Botox or to do, fillers in general. You need to find the right person, the right slot. And accountants look backwards historically at what has happened and can give some insights based upon that. And of course, lawyers help you make sure your paperwork is done correctly. But what you really need is someone to help you look forward. Where do I want to be? How do I measure that? How do I get there? And then, like a good Botox or filler maintenance program, making sure I continue that on a monthly or quarterly basis to maintain those numbers, to build something for the future.
Yeah, great point. You're absolutely right. Yeah. I'm thinking of another doctor I talked to, and he's like, yeah, the way I used to do this was I looked at my bank account. If I had money in there, I was doing good, and it's like, no, not exactly the right way to do that. But sometimes you just get so busy again, running, in the practice, not working on the business. And so again, understanding the differences there. David, you helped many practices prepare to sell, and today's world has really changed. There's whether it's selling to an individual, but a lot of times what we're seeing is a lot of private equity backed companies are coming in doing a lot of roll-ups. Some, maybe just shut off this Vodcast immediately. They're like, I'm not interested in that. Others are like, I hear about this, I'm open to it, but how does this work? So maybe just for our audience, you've talked about a couple of key metrics. Are there a couple other things that when you've gone in that you're like, we need to focus on this, and how do they do that? Because you want to make sure that that business needs to be attractive to this potential buyer, right? You're trying to increase multiples. And if you're looking at a multiple that's 8 to 10, boy, $100,000 salary of somebody could mean a lot, So how do you look at some of those expenses, and how do you help a practice owner today? What are some other metrics? You tell our audience what you're looking for and how you help.
Before anybody shuts me off because they don't want to sell their practice, please listen for a few minutes, because what we're going to talk about, even if you don't sell your practice next year or 5 years from now or 10 years from now, ultimately all owners are going to transition out of their practice. And unlike the old days where maybe you just kind of walk away and ramp down your patients and walk away with maybe nothing, you have a chance, short term or long term or medium term, to have a significant nest egg for your retirement. So selling your practice someday, whenever that may be, what we're going to talk about now, it's applicable whether or not you sell it in 1 year or 20 years from now. So ultimately, all private equity looks at a number of things, but one of the biggest things they look at is back to EBITDA. And people will always ask me, well, what's the EBITDA multiple you got? Well, that's like saying, what's a Mercedes worth? I mean, what kind of Mercedes is it worth? Is it collectible? There's a lot of factors. But a really well-run practice is going to get a higher multiple and have a higher EBITDA. So you get kind of a multiplicative thing. Let's take an example. You have a practice that's doing $10 million a year with a 5% EBITDA multiple, 5% EBITDA to revenue. So they're putting $500,000 in the bottom line. They're going to take a lower multiple because they're not as profitable as they should be. They might get a 7 multiple. So now we're looking at a 3.5, we've got a smaller number we're looking at for a total valuation of that practice. Take that same practice, and let's say we work with Chad's group, and you really optimize your marketing, your KPIs, your staff, and you dial it in to where you get to just a 10% EBITDA multiple, and we grow that same practice to a $13 million revenue. Well, now we're talking a $13 million valuation. So we can double the value of the practice over a 2 to 3 year period of time. It doesn't happen overnight. And then they're always going to look back for a few years, but you can double the value of your practice over a 2 or 3 year period of time, because you can do two things. One, increase the revenue, EBITDA to revenue ratio. And two, because when they come in, they see a fiddle tight, clean practice, your multiple goes up. Those two work together. I think along with that is the repeatability and sustainability of the practice. That means staff turnover. That means your providers. This is one thing most doctors don't think about when they're going to sell. All of your providers are going to be asked to sign a typically 2 to maybe 3 year employment agreement. So if they're not pretty happy with their employment and you're not willing to pay them to stay on with private equity, they may leave, and that's going to dramatically change the value of your practice. So remember, each doctor is their own profit center and needs to be treated as such. And I think lastly, all these little areas, one practice I worked with had their own billing department. That's not necessarily bad. Unfortunately, billing should run about 3.5% to no more than 5% of revenue of their bill collectible amount. Their internal costs were more like 7 or 8%. Well, guys, it doesn't work. So now you've got, and Chad, back to your point, if I've got $100,000 of extra overhead in any one area at a 10 multiple, that's $1 million of practice value. I've had doctors go, what are you talking about? That employee that you don't need, that you're paying $100,000 to, if you truly don't need them, is reducing the value of your practice by $1 million. And then they start to understand the linkage between multiple EBITDA and letting the practice get fat and get expenses to go on. Those are just a couple examples of things I've seen along the way.
Great examples, and there's so much to dive into, and we're very high level today, and I understand that, but I think we've given our audience quite a bit to think about and understand. Boy, this is something that's on my mind. Hopefully, we've piqued the interest of some who are watching and listening today, of saying, boy, I need to understand this better. So if David, with you, if they would like to contact you to maybe have you do an evaluation for them and to see where maybe there's a fit, and if like anyway, they could, how do they contact you? What's your phone number and emails so they can contact you if they're interested in getting more information and kind of having you maybe do a deep dive for them?
Okay. It's David Valaer. Last name is V as in Victor, Alaer. No chat will put it on the screen. But my cell phone direct is 503-998-9552. And my email is simply my name, davidvalaer@gmail.com.
Wonderful. Great insights today, David. Thank you very much. And thank you to our audience for watching and listening today. We wish you all the best. Take care.